Hello, my name is John. I'm a grateful Christian recovering from drugs and alcohol. I just want to take a moment and open with prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, tonight I would like to ask you that the message of hope be heard, that no matter what our struggles are, you will pull us through it. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. My story begins in New York, Queens, where fast-paced living played a big part with me growing up faster than normal. By the age of 9, I had my first drink, and I started smoking weed. By 12, I was using coke and made it my drug of choice for many years. At this age, I was living on my own, jumping from friend to friend, wherever I could find a place to sleep, even underneath the train trestles. I had left home at the age of 12 because my mom and I didn't see eye to eye. My father and mother had been separated for many years, and he didn't reappear in my life until my mid-teens. I was definitely a troubled kid with plenty of anger and took it out on anybody and everybody. My life as a kid wasn't even close to what kids at my age did. I didn't go to school. I didn't have parents telling me what to do. I was the only one to answer to, which probably wasn't the healthiest to be in control of your life at the age of 12. A few years later, I was hanging out in bars, hustling coke, playing pool, and partying with other people's money. What a life, right? I thought I had it all. I must have been about 15 years old, and I was out of control for sure. I was living with my father and stepmother. She was a bartender at one of the bars I would hang and hustle in. My father was battling his own demons as a full-blown heroin addict at the time. I didn't understand anything about heroin and why people would pay for something to make you nod, or why someone would let it physically control your body. A few years passed, and my father brought me to Tommy's house, a guy I knew from about 10 years before. Tommy and my dad had a junkyard together in Brooklyn. Well, for some reason, my father asked Tommy if I could stay with him for a few days so he can get his stuff together. I found out real quick what was going on at Tommy's house. He was selling coke out of the apartment in Brooklyn. So for the next year, I was the runner, the gopher, and anything else I needed to be. There was a lot of traffic in and out and plenty of women spending nights and even weeks at a time. I was 17 during this time, picking up large amounts of coke, partying, hanging out with a variety of women, sleeping all day and up all night. Any 17-year-old would probably think that this was a dream come true kind of a life, but it wasn't. I wanted more for my life, but I didn't know what I wanted yet. I remember being angry and frustrated, so I started hanging out in the park like I did when I was younger, playing handball. I was good, really good at it, and was great at hustling other players. I entered a tournament, and my partner and I took second place. I had been noticing a woman for a few weeks, started talking and playing handball after the tournament. We started a relationship, so I moved from Brooklyn underneath the train trestle in Queens. She lived right around the corner and never knew I was really homeless. Determined to make it work, I got a job at a gas station, then shortly after rented a room. The relationship was going well, and we decided to get married. So at 18, I'm married, still in my addiction, but working every day and building a life for us. Shortly after being married, my wife found out she was pregnant. So I told my father, and he decided he wanted to be the best grandfather he could be, so he got clean. I saw a truck of a place my father used to work and asked the guy if Sal still worked there. He said yes, that he owned it now. So I thought that would be a great job if I can get in there because it was a union job. So I asked my dad if he can get me in there. The next day he took me. They were so happy to see him. He introduced me, and I started the same day working the 3 to 11 shift. I noticed how everyone was real clean cut, and here I am with long hair, mustache, and 2 ears full of earrings. I was called into the boss's office after my shift and told to cut my hair, get rid of the mustache, and lose the earrings. I've been clean cut since. I got close to a guy named Jackie. We carpooled to work, and we were known as troubleshooters, which meant we collected money for bookies, loaned sharks, and ran drugs. Mostly every night we stopped for drinks, but for some reason this night I went straight home. The next day when I didn't hear from Jackie, I knew something was wrong. I went looking for him, but didn't find him. 7 days later, his body was found in the Bronx River. After a sit-down, I found out that he was stealing. I believe God sent me home that night and once again spared me from what I didn't know. I should have realized then that drugs and alcohol can destroy you and take everything from you, but I didn't. I continued doing more and more, trying to escape life. Now in my mid-20s, I tried heroin, and between drinking and using coke, life was getting worse. A few years later, after about losing everything, I sought help for heroin and went on a methadone program. Why not? Stay paid for it, and it was legal, right? Even though I was clean from heroin for 8 years, I was still drinking and using coke. I was first introduced to a recovery program when I was about 13. I had been in and out of rehabs, detoxes, but never for the right reasons. It was just to get a break from the chaos of using and to get my family and friends off my back. It wasn't until 2005 that I really started to take a look at my life and where it was going. My 2 daughters, Renee and Nicole, were teenagers, and the craziness of marriage and life was just so bad, I knew something had to change. I went into a residential program that was 9 to 12 months called MTAR, Methadone to Abstinence Rehabilitation. For the first time in my life, I wanted out from the misery of drugs. I believe this is when I actually started praying and believing in God. I know God opened that door so I could get a glimpse of a good life, the one I never saw. After 8 months of that program, I was off methadone and finally free. I'm free, what a feeling. I didn't need anything to get me through the day. I didn't have to wake up sick anymore. I was finally free. I stayed and completed that program, but for me to have a chance at a new life, I knew staying in New York wasn't good for me. I was really close to my daughters and in the middle of a divorce, trying to start over. I knew the best thing for my kids was for them to stay with their mom until I was able to get them. I left New York with a bag of clothes and a bus ticket, and leaving behind my daughters was the hardest thing I ever had to do. So fresh out of rehab, nowhere really to go, on my way to Florida, I knew my mom lived in Fort Lauderdale, and I went knowing she wouldn't help me because we didn't get along. I got to Florida really late that night, so I called my mom to ask for help, for a place to stay. She quickly responded, "You're a monster, go back to New York," and hung up the phone. So for the next week, I slept wherever I could, on the street, in the bushes, when I came across a trailer that had the Salvation Army written on it. So I called to see if they could help. I spent the next 4 months living at the Salvation Army. I did go to meetings, and some of the requirements was to work the steps. However, I thought the steps were stupid and moved out of the halfway house to start looking for work and get on with my life. I didn't want to do step work or go to meetings. I just wanted to do what John wanted to do. I did go to meetings to get my paper signed for the halfway house. I found a job making some fast cash with a moving company, so it didn't take long to stop going to meetings and start drinking and doing coke again. I borrowed my roommate's car and had been doing coke for a few days. When I left that night, I was up to no good. I picked up a couple pints of vodka, drank them, blacked out, sheriff, locked up, DUI. I spent the last 13 months in rehab in Salvation Army, but I never applied the steps for meetings, and the geographical move from New York to Florida didn't help because I was still with me. I wish I could say I woke up to reality, but I didn't. Thankfully, God was still working on me. It was a year in Fort Lauderdale of broken promises to my kids and chaos once again. I moved to Fort Myers to start over again, but once again, I was still with me. I was still drinking and doing coke every day. I managed to work out of a labor pool and rent a room. I was still on the same roller coaster ride of my life, being turned upside down again. This time it was pills, and I was quickly addicted, sick like I was on heroin and methadone. After a few detox visits, I was able to get clean and move into a halfway house. This is where Celebrate Recovery and Grace Church comes in. Everyone from the halfway house talked so much about Celebrate Recovery and Grace Church, and I couldn't wait to go. I remember my first time here. The music was great. The people all looked like me, all different, and I felt like I fit right in. I had been coming here since 2008. I wish I could say I stayed sober, but that would be a lie. I wasn't working a program, I didn't have a sponsor, and it didn't take long for me to relapse once again. I found myself back in detox. This time I was in no rush to leave it. The Oxford House had brought a meeting in and talked about their halfway house. It sounded good as I had no money and nowhere to go. When I got there, the first thing they had were a bunch of rules, and I had to do them to stay there. So I had to be out of the house by 8 o'clock, and I couldn't come back until 4. I had to look for work. I had to go look for work at least 10 places a day and have my paper signed at each place. I was fresh out of detox, still in the fog, and only had 9 signatures, so I had to keep looking for another place to apply. I lived deep in the Cape, but I was on 41 getting ready to hit the last place, and this woman passed me in her car. I had met her while I was in one of the halfway houses. She was looking for someone to cook for her dad who ran events at the Knights of Columbus, and guess who volunteered? Yeah, me. I didn't think much of it then, but that woman would eventually become my wife. God was still working, and I didn't even know it. So here I am looking for work, and she pulled up and asked me, what am I doing way down here? And I said, looking for work. She didn't believe me, so I had to pull out my paper and show her, and we both laughed. I asked her for a ride, and that was the beginning of a beautiful relationship. I really was trying to do the right thing. Mary and I spent a lot of time together talking mostly. As I got to know her, I found out she went to Grace and had been for a while. CR was big. It was the place to be on a Friday night. It was also required I made a certain amount of meetings a week, which required a signature. Meetings are okay. I had no problem going to them, but it really came down to if you're going to use, you're going to use. So why work the steps to get a sponsor or accountability partner? What I didn't know was that those steps and a sponsor and accountability partners can do for you in your recovery. I've been in and out of programs, detoxes, AA, NA, and not once really worked the program. I didn't understand the concept of working the steps or telling other people your life story. I, for one, didn't trust anyone, and I wasn't about to tell you about my past. I did know there had to be a different side of life, a better one, but I didn't know how to keep it. When all the while the answers were right in front of me, the opportunities were there time and time again. But I couldn't grasp it. I was too blind to see. My ego was too huge. Mary and I continued to see each other. We would sit and talk for hours. I had finally met a caring, loving, unselfish child of God woman. I knew God put her in my life for a reason. As I was building a relationship with God, here I was sitting next to someone who tried her best to live in a godly way. This was something so very different from what I was used to. At the same time, I could tell you it was something I wanted, and it didn't take long. She proposed, and I accepted. Strange but true. I was surprised but happy. For the first time in many years, I was truly happy. For about the next year, I stayed sober, but I wasn't making meetings and didn't have a sponsor. It was just a matter of time before I was back using. My wife was pregnant, getting ready to have a baby, and here I was back to my old ways. It didn't take long to get arrested for another DUI, and a week later, another one. I wish I could say that woke me up, but it didn't. Not long after my daughter Faith was born, my wife was pregnant again. This time I was heavy into pills and drinking. I couldn't believe once again I was caught up in that vicious cycle that I was able to break several years earlier. I wasn't mad at anyone per se, but mad at myself. Here I was with a second chance, with a family and 2 newborns that I thought I would never mistreat or let them go through what I've put my first 2 daughters and family through. I tried my best to push my wife and kids away because I didn't want to hurt them, not realizing I was hurting them either way. It eventually took for me being arrested in Georgia. While in Georgia, my wife, who was also using at the time, had also been arrested. Our kids had to be given a family, which I was very grateful for. While in jail, I read the Bible, asking God for guidance. I remember feeling a sense of peace, knowing it was over, as much as it hurt to have my kids taken away and my wife in jail. I had 2 weeks left to my release with nowhere to go, my family gone, no job. I had nothing left. A pastor from a local church had come to visit me. He asked me, what am I going to do when I get out? In the past, it would have been me doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. But this time, something was different. When I told him I didn't know, with tears rolling down my face, he said, how about a program? God was still there, even though I had never had a relationship. He still sent one of his angels to reach out to me. 2 weeks later, when I was released, the pastor was waiting for me. I went to the program and I graduated. I wanted to stay on as a servant leader, so I worked on myself in the program and my relationship with God. I was able to focus on me and my recovery. God did have a plan for me, and for the first time in my life, I truly believed that. Even though I was still getting in the way, God's grace was opening doors. My counselor helped me get into a halfway house back in Florida in Daytona. A couple of weeks in, I saw people using, and I wanted nothing to do with it. I called my sister-in-law, who was helping take care of my kids, and asked if she knew of any halfway houses in Fort Myers. A few days later, I was on a bus to Fort Myers. I went to plenty of meetings, as well as Celebrate Recovery, and I got very involved doing service work. I got a sponsor, worked my steps, and did all the things I never did on a consistent basis before. I quit fighting what was working for so many others and started doing the next right thing. I wish I could say everything was fixed, but that was far from the truth. Life was getting better, even though I still had my everyday struggles. I wasn't using, I was sober and living life on life's terms. My wife's release was coming up on December 3rd, but I wasn't ready to start putting my marriage back together when life struck again. 2 days before her release, my 16-year-old stepdaughter, Hope, lost her battle with cancer. I had only been sober about 4 months, but for once in my life, I wasn't worried or afraid, because I knew God had it. See, I was on fire for the Lord, and I was working my program. I had good people in my life. Someone asked me to go to a meeting that day, so I said, and I shouldn't be alone, so I went to 2 meetings and stayed around people who cared. I wasn't one really to talk about my feelings, but I knew God had me right where I needed to be. I can't explain the way I felt, but somehow I knew God was going to help me through this without drinking or drug. I just knew God didn't bring me this far to watch me fall. My relationship with God continues to grow. I trust Him and give my will totally to Him. He has never let me down. My life today is so different from what it used to be. I don't stress or worry about anything. I do my best to let God handle it. I know I can't control or change others. I stay away from drama. I don't do the things I used to do. I don't look too far ahead. I like to stay in the day and the moment. God has restored many of my relationships that were broken and building back my relationship with my kids, my mom, who I talk to pretty much every day, my daughter Renee, who hasn't talked to me in 10 years. We've been talking for the past year and have probably been as close as we have ever been. None of this would have been possible if it wasn't for Celebrate Recovery and the 12 steps that I work daily in my life. I had to tell another about my past and who I really was. That's called sharing the inventory, step 5. Working with my sponsor, doing service work, staying active in recovery has helped me to give back what was so freely given to me. My faith in God is knowing He's in control gives me such peace in my life. Galatians 2:20 says, I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live by Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave His Son Himself for me. That scripture means so much to me. It means I'm a new creation whose chains have been broken and I have been set free. I'm a person of worth and a child of God. I currently facilitate the Men's Chemical Dependency Small Group. I completed the 12-step study, and I am so blessed. If you would have told me I would be doing something like this 2 years ago, I would have said you're crazy. But God, He has a plan for us all. And if you want God to laugh, tell Him your plan. In James 1:2-4, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you're faced with trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. No matter how big the storm is, God will bring me through it if I trust Him to get me through. Don't keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. When Matthew 7:23-27 says, everyone who hears these words and don't put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew, beat against the house, and it fell with a great crash. That was the story of my life, but not any longer, and it doesn't have to be yours. Today, my life is like Matthew 7:24-25. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house, yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. Today, God is my rock, my foundation, and as long as I keep working the 12 steps and building my relationship with God, I know He will get me through the struggles of life. I'm a new creation in Christ, a person of worth, and a child of God. Thank you for letting me share.